Have you tried challenging traditional notions of beauty or gender roles through your depiction of the human figure? I'm Andrew Joseph Keith. I'm an artist and sculptor and online sculpting instructor. In this video, I wanted to go over some questions. A student reached out to me and was interested in asking some questions for a paper she was doing. And I thought it would be interesting to share some of those answers with you guys. And these questions range from materials and technique to more the philosophy behind artwork. And so I just thought it would be interesting to just share some of my answers. This is a question I get a lot. What materials do you use? I typically use an oil and wax-based clay called Chavant Medium NSP clay. It doesn't dry out, and when I want to make a sculpture permanent, then I have to mold and cast it in another material like plaster or resin. I've also worked in stone, and when I'm working in stone, typically my figures are more abstract. That's the style of stone sculpting that I learned from my instructor. My instructor in college would do entirely abstract stone sculptures and focus on the line work and forms, and I took some of those abstractions and tried to apply it to the figure because I'm always interested in the human figure, the human form. Another question, do you have a different approach in sculpting men versus women? The technique or basic approach of sculpting the human figure remains fairly consistent regardless of whether I'm sculpting a man or a woman or a child. It starts with a wire armature, and then I usually build out the most important underlying forms, the primary forms, in a simplified way. And then I'll add the secondary forms like the anatomy and finally the details and the surface texture. So that's typically the process. That's a process that I walk through in my online sculpting courses, and taking it from simple, and generally when you're sculpting clay, because it's additive sculpture, you want to start thin and then slowly build out the form. Now we're getting into some interesting questions. How do you account for the differences in female versus male? And here's my response. Typically the female figure is softer and more flowing and gestural, whereas the male figure tends to be harder, more blocky, and stable. While these archetypes permit flexibility and exceptions, I find them to be a good guide for my own work when sculpting a man or a woman. Anatomically, men have wider rib cage, narrower hips, broader shoulders, and a more prominent bone structure. Women have a narrower rib cage, wider hips that are tilted more forward, narrower and softer shoulders, less muscle mass, and more subcutaneous fat that makes a softer figure. What are the challenges of sculpting the female figure versus the male figure? The challenge of sculpting the female figure is capturing beauty. One of the most difficult things to sculpt is a young, attractive woman, because any deviation from the symmetry or the proportion, it becomes a glaring distraction from the beauty of the female figure or the face. While it is a challenge, I do enjoy sculpting the female figure more than the male figure because of its inherent beauty. And I think most people can agree that generally women are more beautiful than men, even in describing men, handsome, rugged versus beautiful, delicate. There's just different words we use to say that somebody is attractive, whether it's a man or a woman. Do you sculpt from photos or from life? I typically sculpt from photographs right now, but there's no substitute from sculpting from life. I helped start the Figure Sculptors United that holds regular sculpting competitions among professional sculptors. It's always an awesome experience to have a living, breathing model and a group of talented sculptors in the same space trying to capture the figure in their own way. The benefits of working from photos is that it can be done at home at a much lower cost. The benefit of working from a live model is being able to observe much more visual information and see how the body moves, breathes, and holds itself in space and over time. How do you ensure that the proportions and anatomy of your sculptures are accurate? There are many ways to check your sculpture. When working from photos, I like to overlay images of the references with images of the sculpture from the same angle to check the proportions and outline. And I like to do this with an app called the DaVinci Eye app. I think it's really useful. And so if you're interested in that, check out that application. It just allows you to overlay the reference images with your camera, and then you can check the sculpture directly. Really useful. I use it all the time. There's also measuring, using a mirror to check my work, or studying a specific anatomical feature or area when I'm not sure how to represent that part of the body. Have you tried to challenge traditional notions of beauty or gender roles through your depictions of the human form? Here's my response. No, I haven't tried to challenge traditional notions of beauty or gender roles through my depictions of the human figure. While I have experimented with abstraction and stylization of the figure, the goal was always to find beauty in the figure and share that beauty through my work. I do not believe that those who choose to focus on deconstructing or redefining beauty are a benefit to the arts. These people often lack the talent and skill required to create truly beautiful or impressive works of art, and so they busy themselves with tearing down great works of others so that they can feel better about their own inability to create masterful artworks. I do not believe in artistic relativism because I believe that art has a purpose, and some works of art fulfill that purpose better than others. When it comes to breaking down gender roles, it appears to me that the abandonment of gender roles in society has done nothing to improve the lives of men or women. I do not believe that men and women are interchangeable. Many women have been convinced that being employed and working for money is a superior calling and will provide more life fulfillment than raising children and working as a homemaker. At the same time that gender roles have been diminished and attacked, women have become more and more miserable, and rates of depression, mental illness, and dissatisfaction in relationships have increased. Men and women who live by traditional gender roles, with the father as the provider and protector and the mother as the nurturer and homemaker, tend to be happier than men and women who seek to redefine gender norms and remove all traditional expectations for their relationship. Traditional gender roles are the ideal. Something that I was thinking about when I was reading over this response is, if you're in a movie and you don't get the role, if you don't have a role, that means you don't have a part. You don't have a part to play in the movie. So when they say we need to abolish gender roles, we need to get rid of gender roles, they're saying we need to get rid of your part in the relationship. And so there's just kind of a confusion that comes about when people say, you know what, there's no responsibilities that pertain to women. In a relationship, there's no responsibilities that pertain to men. It's all up for grabs, and everybody should just try to get as much as they can out of the relationship. I think it fosters competition, animosity, a feeling of, oh, I'm doing more in this area than you are. And so I think the redefinition and the destruction of gender roles is not a good thing in society. I don't think it's been a good thing. I don't think there's any evidence that it's benefited men or women. And it seems like this feminist philosophy that men and women, that the only differences between men and women are socially constructed, like the only reason that women tend to be at home and care for the children and the men go out and work, that doesn't have anything to do with maybe some biological differences where women bear more of the consequence of sexual reproduction and caring for children, and men tend to be stronger and more able to go out and find food and work outside of the home. Like, it has nothing to do with that. It all has to do with social construction. And if we just did away with all of those gender roles, everybody would be better off. And I don't see any evidence for that. Okay, continuing with my response. Traditional gender roles are the ideal. I am fortunate to be able to fill my role as a father and be married to a woman who fulfills her role as a mother, and together we have created and now raise our children to understand the value of men and women and the value of the roles of men and women play in the family and in society. Women need men, and men need women, and children need their mother and their father. The closer society can get to this ideal, the better off individuals, families, and communities will be. Okay, I thought those were interesting questions, and so I just wanted to share some of my responses. I do think that artists should be able to share what they think and what they believe through their artwork, and verbally that they should be able to say what they believe. That's something that's really important to me. I've had people come to me, people that I work with, and say, you know, you would probably do better in marketing your artwork or marketing your online courses if you didn't mention your beliefs in this or that issue, or your religious beliefs or political beliefs. I think that when you believe something to be true and to be important, that you should be able to say that openly. Basically, say what you believe to be true, let the consequences fall where they may. I think that's an important principle that more people should apply in their own lives. I know a lot of artists that have come to me and said, I wish I could be open. I'm also a conservative, or I'm also a Christian. But, you know, artists, they're just not interested in that type of thing. And generally, that's true that the arts tilt more left. I think there will be more and more of a market for people in the arts and people support the arts that have that more conservative leaning and are interested in bringing back some of the traditional principles that have guided society for so long. I think as we get away from things like the traditional family, the traditional gender roles, and recognizing that there's differences between men and women, as we've pretended that men and women are interchangeable, that you can change a man for a woman, that you can have two men and it's the same as a man and a woman, as we've tried this experiment of pretending that there are no inherent differences between men and women, that society has gotten more and more disturbed and less happy and less fulfilled because it's a lie, because it's not true. Men and women are not interchangeable. I've sculpted men, I've sculpted women. They're different. Their bodies are different. Our minds are different. We think differently. And yes, there are effeminate men and there are more masculine women, but they're still in those different categories of men and women, male and female. But I think recognizing those categories and recognizing that we all have our role to play. I think God created us male and female, men and women, and that He created us to be complementary to one another. And I think that's a good thing. Okay, that's it for this video. Stay creative, stay productive. I'll see you in the next one.